Welcome to our MAC Conversations About Leadership series. My name is Zanele Nkosi. I am a leadership and executive coach, as well as a leadership development facilitator. I'm particularly fascinated by the way in which leaders lead, how they lead themselves in an empowered and courageous fashion, which allows them to lead others effectively. Today, we start with the first part of a three-part series on transformational leadership, a topic that is front of mind for clients as they are fundamentally challenged to shift their businesses, to adapt and evolve to technological shifts, as well as changes to their core business models. Particularly in the realm of digital, where increasingly they are challenged to consider the possible impact and possibilities around AI and its impact on consumers, as well as their businesses and business models, and their people and the way that they work. Today, I'm joined by John Brody, a senior executive at MAC Consulting. John leads the people and culture practice at MAC and has 20 years in leadership development as well as organizational transformation, specifically in the areas of consumer and technology-led businesses. This after leaving his practice as a clinical psychologist. Welcome, John. Really awesome to see you. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself, a little more about yourself, as well as what it is that is fascinating for you about this transformational leadership practice.
Thanks very much, Zanele. I think transformation for me has been a big part of my career, both as a clinical psychologist and then more than 20 years ago when I went into management consulting. Firstly, I got to work a lot in community when I was a psychologist in practice, and really understanding as South Africa transformed and shifted the way we think, and many fundamental shifts in our mindsets, our beliefs, and saw what that did to people and what was required to make some of those shifts. I think bringing that thinking and that experience into the workplace and working with leaders over the last 20 years as they have to drive significant change has been a real key focus and area that I've been deeply curious about in terms of how we support and help people make that massive transition. I think that's become increasingly topical because I think the rate of disruption and change has only accelerated. And we're seeing that now in the space of AI coming in, but prior to that, the shift into digital models, platform businesses, and big market shifts in terms of how consumers consume things, what they expect from business and organizations, whether you're a bank or a retailer or a fast-moving consumable goods company. So that's really been where I've found deep interest and fascination.
And so then what is it that you see as the key qualities of transformational leadership?
I mean, there are many qualities and there's a lot written on transformational leadership.
Right.
But I think for me, what stood out were three critical qualities. The one is vulnerability, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. The second is empathy. And the third is what I call a resilient purpose. And I think for me, those three qualities may not sound very technical, because if you listen to the disruption and the shift in business models and strategies, you'd think that actually having a kind of more technical shift is where leaders need to focus. But for me, it's really my understanding and learning has been that it's around those human components of leadership. And that's where we struggle. And I think not just leaders, but humans generally are struggling with making these transitions.
So then for this part of our three-part series, then let's dive a little bit more into this area of vulnerability.
Yeah, vulnerability. And I think, when we think about leaders in the traditional sense, we think about people that are certain, that are kind of heroic, that are shaping the way. But interestingly, when you're faced with a key disruption to your business or a fundamental change, it does expose us. And I think leaders that are willing to embrace that vulnerability and be open to the fact that they don't know or don't understand, or more importantly, are open to learning, is a critical quality for being a transformational leader.
And so then what is it that you would say are the challenges that people say in terms of being able to embrace that in this leadership?
So I think it goes back to what I said about the kind of traditional sense of leadership. We often want or look to leaders to kind of lead the way, show us how it's done. And when a leader has to sort of step back and say, look, I don't know, it fundamentally changes their role in what it means to lead. And I think for me, key when you're a vulnerable leader is that being able to say, I don't know, means that you invite others and you create the space for others with experience, knowledge, diverse views of the world into the conversation and into your leadership role and supporting you. So that ability to kind of get the right level of support or input from others becomes quite key. And I think that ability to collaborate is quite tough for many leaders, because the way many of our traditional organizations are set up, they're not set up in a collaborative way. They're set up in a 20th century business model, which puts you into functional silos, where there's, in essence, a little bit of accountability and a bit of internal competition. Now, as a leader, you're having to say, well, actually, we all need to kind of share. We need to recognize what we don't know. We have to be open to bringing in and partnering with people that are outside of our business, that might have a different culture or a different perspective. And so I think that's those are some of the key challenges for leaders as they shift into being vulnerable.
And so what comes up for me is the question around, so what is it that people perceive then when we say vulnerability, and what may be the misconceptions around what it is that they need to be doing?
I think the first and primary misconception around vulnerability is that we confuse it with weakness.
Right.
So weakness is a very different thing. You know, if I'm not able to stand up or to form a point of view. Being vulnerable actually talks to a deep sense of self-belief and confidence, because that ability to engage in and say, I don't know, by default means that I'm willing to expose some of myself. And that means that I have to have belief that I can deal with it, I'll learn, I'll adapt, I'll shift. So I think for me, that's one of the primary misconceptions around vulnerability. The second is that, you know, by exposing a vulnerability in a business, potentially that exposes your business to, you know, somebody else taking advantage of that vulnerability, or exposes you to somebody taking advantage of that vulnerability. And so it talks a lot to how we set up our cultures, how we create the environment where people can be vulnerable, and also how we start thinking differently around how we partner and collaborate with others to achieve our goals and outcomes. If we take a traditional kind of Porter sense of strategy, which said, you know, it's all about building competitive advantage and sort of winning, in this new economy, actually a lot of how we create value is in the horizontal. It's in our ecosystem. It's where we partner, where we give away information, we give away things in order to gain or collaborate with our customers, with other business players in the market. So that shift in how we think about vulnerability is, for me, quite key.
And there are almost two parts for me with this, right? So there's the leader and them being able to speak their vulnerability in the leading and the collaborating process, right? And then the piece outside with the co-opetition piece almost within the ecosystem. And so how then on those two levels is it that we can start to build our vulnerability as leaders? What do leaders do to build that capability?
I think they start to first really develop a shared understanding in the teams that they lead, that we will succeed because of collaboration, that it's okay to not have all the answers. And in fact, we encourage people to recognize where there are gaps. And that's one of the key drivers of collaboration, because then I start thinking about, well, if I don't have all the answers, I'm going to need to participate or engage with others. Right. And so I think it's starting to first highlight to people what the value is of being vulnerable and how it unlocks the next level of value in the business. So when you pivot people from seeing like you own it, you control it, that sort of mindset that often exists in teams, and you're accountable for that, to saying actually there's a shared ownership, and that if we collaborate and work together, we can unlock far greater value. So for me, that's a first condition of success around setting that up. I think a second thing for me is how we deal with mistakes or failure. So if you're going to encourage people to say they don't know, to try new things, by default, there will be mistakes. And for me, one of the phrases, I know we often talk about fail fast, fail forward, but people hear the word failure and they, oh, I don't want to fail.
That's right.
And I think for me, when you start reframing failure and you say, you know, failure is when we fail to learn from our mistakes, but recognize that mistakes are a fundamental part of the journey and how we manage that. So those for me are two things that one can see the value in working together and actually not knowing, so you bring different people in and different thinking and diversity and build a far more inclusive way of engaging. And the second thing is how you start dealing with failure and start orientating people towards learning. So that fail fast, fail forward is quickly recognize we've made a mistake and let it go and move on. So encouraging people to acknowledge the mistake, let it go and move on, not to perpetuate the mistake.
And so any other, and you've said now really some pieces around how people can build that capability within their business, and leaders can, in terms of how they speak with the people that they're leading. And in addition to that then, so any really quick tips, advice on how to really have that culture of vulnerability?
I think for me, it's, for a leader, I think what I've found works for me as a leader in business, but working with other leaders, is thinking about who are those core people that we can start building a next level of trust with, a next level of engagement with, where you can start having more of those frank and open conversations, start acknowledging the challenges, creating an opportunity where you can have robust conflict and disagreement. Because one of the key things is when you sort of start going into a space where you start saying, I don't know, and bringing other people into the conversation, it does increase the potential for disagreement or conflict or different ideas. And so creating that smaller space where you start nurturing a kind of a circle of trust, and that's not about being exclusive, but it's creating a space where you can start having those robust conversations, setting a different tone, and then building that out and encouraging your leaders to start creating that within their teams. So I see teams as a key space where that is built. How you run, how you set up, the type of culture you build within the teams, within organizations, and recognizing that organizations these days with their complex matrix or network structures are not one team. They are you often find yourself in multiple teams. So when I think about the team I'm in, what is the culture? What are the ways of working? How do we do things differently that encourage people to, one, be open to sharing their knowledge, sharing when they don't know, and managing mistakes so that we can foster learning and accelerate that. So for me, just to bring that all together, I think what's fundamental about being vulnerable is, are you able to, one, yourself be open to learning, adapting, and letting go what you know? Because you can't transform or shift if you hang on to what you know. And it's really, really tough to do. The second thing is think about the teams you lead and the individuals you lead, and how are you creating that space for them to, one, acknowledge when they don't know, be open to the fact that there's better or different ways of doing things. And then as they try and move into that space, understand that they're going to learn and that they're going to make mistakes.
Really lovely. It raises for me some of the considerations around Amy Edmondson's psychological safety, for example, and that framework, and how we use that for the culture of an organization.
Absolutely.
Anything else then, John, that you would like to leave us with from this first part?
Yeah, I think what you start seeing when you get into transformational leaders is that you see a lot of these buzzwords start coming to life. And I think we need to start thinking about what they actually mean. You just used the term psychological safety. Yeah. Practically, how do you create that? How do you create an environment where people can make mistakes? How do you create an environment where people can say they don't know? Yeah. But it's lovely in terms of that reference. When we start talking about collaboration, big buzzword. Practically, what are the things that make people willing or open to collaborating, sharing knowledge, sharing where they don't know? Critical things that are fundamental to driving these new digital platform-led business models, but key in terms of the way you lead and shift.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that wisdom, John. So please join us for our second part in terms of transformational leadership on empathy.